Pokemon Scarlet and Violet gave us plenty of new Pokemon with their Indigo Disk DLC, so today I want to break down the best new Pokemon that are coming with this DLC into Regulation F. Now this isn't necessarily going to be just a top 5 or a top 10 video or anything of that sort. Instead, I just want to find out what the really good Pokemon are and how good they'll be in the format. Now this list isn't necessarily going to be in order either from weakest to strongest. Instead, I'm clumping Pokemon based on what role they're going to provide to the format, and I'll be talking about them in a way that I think just makes the most sense categorically speaking. With all that said, let's start off with our first group of Pokemon today. Now the Indigo Disk DLC did one thing very right. It made sure to buff 3 different weathers in a very significant way. We got the return of Venusaur, Kingdra, and Excadrill, all of which were the premier weather sweepers for each of their respective weather, and this DLC will be amazing for buffing these. All 3 of these Pokemon benefit greatly from Terra, and on top of that as well, their speed is still pretty important in the format. While we have in the past year gotten a lot of Pokemon that can actually compete with these in the upper echelon, such as Flutterman and Iron Bundle, Venusaur's speed tier of base 80 is nothing to scoff at, and this is the slowest of the 3. Now I won't lie, Venusaur barely outpacing Roaring Moon is definitely pretty rough, but Venusaur wasn't really meant to be leaning into that modest nature anyway, and instead typically benefited as a really good sleep powder partner with a wide lens on sun teams. This format will still definitely have a place for that, as sleep has proven to be pretty relevant, as even Lilycole has still held on to a niche presence in the format, and Venusaur just typically did this role better due to a better set of dual stabs. Meanwhile, Excadrill's gonna tear through the format. Excadrill's speed even allows it to actually, with a max speed Jolly Nature, outpace timid booster speed Fluttermane. With the only Pokemon that can outpace it being Iron Bundle right now, outside of some sort of Scarf Regieleki, this means that Excadrill on Sand can definitely just run a Jolly max speed Nature to creep the Fluttermane, and then throw in a Clear Amulet so it's not susceptible to things like Icy Wind Iron Bundle or Intimidate Landorus Therian anymore. Kingdra might struggle a bit to hold on to relevance though, as Rain has actually opted to stand away from the Swift Pokemon this generation, in favor of more offensive damage breakers such as Palafin in early regulations and in later formats Urshifu Rapid Strike. I still expect it to at least make 1 or 2 top 8s during the course of Regulation F, as it is a 4-month format, especially considering Kingdra has access to Hurricane still, as well as its dual stab combination, which hits so many different things for incredible damage. Especially when Rain is boosting your water stabs, Hurricane is great for most water type checks, and Dragon is great for anything that falls in the middle. Regardless though, I think all 3 Pokemon especially are going to benefit from Terra, since all of them benefit from not only having a great stab set of Terras, leaning into their typings, or even just going with something like a Terra Fire for coverage, in order to try and, in Venusaur's case, boost Stab Weather Ball, in Kingdra's case gain a Fairy Resistance, and in Excadrill's case avoid Burns while gaining a little bit better matchup into specifically a Fluttermane Chiyu type of team. I do expect all 3 of these Pokemon to definitely shine in Regulation F to varying levels of success, with Excadrill probably being the best, since these will not only take advantage of the already amazing weather setters that we currently have, but also Tornadus, which can actually set all 3 weathers, making it a very strong partner for all 3 of these Pokemon, as it can also set Tailwind to further boost their speed. Now the next section I want to go over is budget intimidators. Since we all know that Incineroar made this list, it didn't get severely nerfed, guys. I know. So instead, I want to go over some Intimidate partners that you guys can either consider over Incineroar or even just next to it for a second Intimidate option. The Indigo Disk gave us 3 Pokemon in particular that I think actually really stand out in this role, being Hitmontop, Scrafty, and Granbull. Of these 3, I think Scrafty is going to be by far the most niche of these, considering it's not only competing with Incineroar for one of its typings as a dark type, but also Iron Hands as a fighting type. And these will still be 2 of the 5 most used Pokemon in Regulation F for certain. Not only this, but you have a 4 times weakness to Fluttermane's Fairy Stab, making you weaker to another Pokemon that will probably be in the top 5 this generation. So Scrafty's not really in the best position here. However, Scrafty does have one particular niche, being a very specific set of support moves that no other Intimidate option actually gets, all of which together. For starters, Scrafty gets access to moves like Helping Hand, Fake Out, Taunt, and Knockoff, which might seem pretty similar to Incineroar's current kit, until you factor in that Scrafty also has one more move that Incineroar doesn't get, being Upper Hand. Now, of the Upper Hand and Fake Out Pokemon, there aren't a lot that can actually keep up with Scrafty, with the only one, in my opinion, that can being Hitmontop. Though Scrafty having a Stab Knockoff actually does set it apart here, and it can actually be a pretty decent option as a nice Trick Room Intimidate option. Now, it's not to say that I think that Scrafty will be super relevant off of this, but if Scrafty was to pick up a place in the metagame, I do think this is a good place to start. start. Hitmontop though, I think is going to have a much better time adapting to the format. Now Hitmontop definitely just generally has performed better in recent formats, though in one particular area where I think Hitmontop will definitely shine the most is through its massive priority move pool. Hitmontop has plenty of options in its arsenal, such as Sucker Punch and Mach Punch, as well as the ever-present Fake Out and even the new move Upper Hand, though it also is just a much more natural partner for Incineroar due to the fact that it's not showing any of its defensive typings. Also, Hitmontop only having a 2x weakness to Fairy is definitely a much better position to be in, since Incineroar will be a fire type for your team that's not actually going to resist it. I think in particular this could be a great partner for especially the parting shot Incineroars, and you could throw on a Rillaboom just for good measure and start really cycling through your opponent with some nice stat drops there. Of the 3 Intimidate Pokemon, I think Gramble's going to be by far the most interesting though. With options like Thunder Wave and Taunt in its move pool, this is a pretty unique set of support moves for an Intimidate Pokemon, only actually having Quillfish and Gyarados in the mix to even run these as an alternative. Gramble does have one particular niche that neither of those Pokemon have, which is the ability to successfully check Iron Hands due to your Pure Fairy type in pre-Terra. Now this is something that even Gyarados has tried to replicate through a Terra Fairy in previous formats such as Regulation C, but Gramble just does the job significantly better because it can choose to then Terra into any other typing it wants instead of having a 4x weakness to one of the best Pokemon in the format. I think that Gramble will probably end up opting for a Terra Water and try and pull a reverse Gyarados here, since it can choose to just post Terra into Terra Water and then start checking the combination of her Sheepfruit Rapid and Qianpao, for example, while pre-Terra just having a much better pure typing. And this even in Trick Room could be a nice option, as Play Rough from a Fairy Stab could be great for hitting Pokemon like Iron Hands and the Ursalunas once you've gotten Trick Room up. I don't think that any of these 3 Pokemon will necessarily overtake Incineroar, but they're all definitely really good budget Intimidate options. In Regulation E, Trick Room took a backseat to Tailwind as one of the premier forms of speed controls for players. However, the Indigo Disk DLC actually gave us a lot of really good Pokemon that can take advantage of this archetype very well. For starters, we got the return of Porygon 2, which historically has been one of the most consistent Trick Room setters of all time, even rivaling the likes of Cresselia. Now there's one particular area where Porygon 2 shines over something like a Dusclops, which is its most competitive option for a Violate Trick Room setter, and Cresselia, which is just the other bulkiest Trick Room setter in the format, being that it not only has Recover, which is something that Dusclops doesn't have, but it also just has a lot better abilities than Cresselia would have for the format as well. Now typically you would run Download, as it does help Porygon 2 become a lot less passive offensively speaking, though I think Trace also actually is a pretty good merit in this current format, as a way to not only trace common Intimidate Pokemon like Landorus, T, and Incineroar, but you can also trace Chew and Qianpao's abilities in order to no longer get your defenses weakened by them, which could actually be a really good place for Porygon 2 to be in. Meanwhile, for offensive options in this format, we actually gained 3 really incredible ones, being Primarina, Araquanid, and Rhyperior. Starting off with Primarina, in previous formats this would have had to compete with Tapu Fini as a good Water Fairy typing for the special side, but without Tapu Fini in the mix, Primarina actually does stand out a lot as a really good Water type special breaker. With 2 really strong spread moves through Dazzling Gleam and a Liquid Voice, Water Stab, Hyper Voice, you can actually make this into an incredible sweeper in terms of Trick Room, and then throw on something like a Scald and then Protect, or even just a random Terra Blast for coverage, in order to make Primarina into an offensive monster. Meanwhile, you have a Araquanid actually, which is a really good physical water type that can even underpace the likes of Azumarill, Kingambit, Iron Hands, and the Ursalunas, making it an absolute nightmare to fight in Trick Room. Especially with Terra Water, you're only going to further boost the damage output here, and you even have access to Wide Guard, which is going to be great with the return of Expanding Force on Pokemon such as Hatterene. Speaking of Hatterene, if you guys want to see a video covering the best buffs from the DLC, let's get this one to 40 likes, and I'll cover the best buffs that came out of the recent DLC, as it's a whole separate list that I could be going into as well here. Regardless though, we do have one other breaker to talk about today for Trick Room, which is going to be none other than Rhyperior, which actually is a pretty good niche. Now I won't lie, I think the first place that my mind goes to is looking towards the future at the restricted formats, as with Terra Fairy and Lightning Rod, this actually is a really good check to Koraidon and Miraidon simultaneously, which very few other Pokemon can actually do. For now though, that same Terra Fairy ability could actually be really good with Lightning Rod as an incredible check to the likes of Raging Bolt, which will be at least a kinda decent option going forward in Regulation F, thanks to its priority through the move of Thunderclap. If you're not a huge fan of Lightning Rod though, Solid Rock with any sort of Terra type you want for a new defensive option could be a really incredible option to explore for Rhyperior. Especially with its incredible physical bulk, you could really make this into an absolute monster and take advantage of an item like Weakness Policy in order to keep up damage wise. Now I will say damage is the one area where Rhyperior is sadly going to get a bit power crept this format, since with the introduction of the Ursalunas, it's no longer the best ground type damage wise. However, with the base 40 speed, you can at least underpace them, so if you do find a good way to activate a weakness policy, you could technically at least out-damage the likes of Ursaluna. If Rhyperior got Headlong Rush, I think this would be a whole different discussion, and Rhyperior might even actually be a strong meta Pokemon, but for now I do think it's just gonna have a nice niche as a Pokemon in Trick Room that is a ground-type stab that also underpaces the Ursalunas, though it will by no means actually be a top-tier Pokemon. Before we get into the very best of the best returning Pokemon, I do have 5 other Pokemon that just kind of filled into very awkward roles where I couldn't really categorize any of them. They all just kind of exist. The first one, of course, falls into the very unique support Pokemon being none other than Smeargle. Now, everyone kind of knows that Smeargle is a pretty damning Pokemon in VGC. Despite it never reaching Incineroar levels of usage, it is typically considered the support god of VGC. With options like Fake Out, Spore, and many other good utility moves through Sketch, Smeargle has no lack of viable ways to keep up with the format. And with new moves like Revival Blessing entering the mix, it's only going to become that much scarier. However, when it has to compete with Urshifu Rapid, which is an immediate focus Ashbreaker for it that can still only force you to actually target it with a single Pokemon, and it would even get through the likes of options like Spiky Shield that Smeargle used to run, it'll definitely struggle a lot to keep up with the current format. Smeargle will definitely find a way to transform itself from a Pokemon that gets completely clapped into an absolute work of art, and I look forward to seeing where this Pokemon goes. We do have a couple other really good support Pokemon entering the mix that are a bit more unique in their support, but they can definitely find a place in this generation. These two would be none other than Comfey and Suicune, both of which are pretty decent Tailwind options. Now, Comfey I think will benefit a lot more from Close Sheet, as it's not only a really good Tailwind Pokemon, but it's also an incredible Trick Room setter, and it's one of the few Pokemon that can viably do both, even if you have the exact same set of 6 Pokemon that slots Comfey on. Comfey also has the ability Triage, which means its healing moves gain +3 priority, so options like Draining Kiss are a really good way to actually activate a weakness policy while still having Comfey gain some nice health back. I don't think a Comfey exactly will have a huge tournament level success, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't expect this Pokemon to at least do something across the format, and I think that the latter will be the best place for this Pokemon to shine. I think Suicune's actually going to be the opposite. I don't think we'll see a lot of it on the ladder, but this will definitely, in my opinion, have some pretty decent tournament success over the current format. With options like Tailwind and Snarl, this is a fairly unique Tailwind setter as a really bulky Pokemon. With moves like Scald in its arsenal as well as really good damage control for the physical side, and even the ability Inner Focus, you can now ease off the Covert Cloak and Terra Ghost options that you would have potentially seen from another Pokemon like Whimsicott that might be a Tailwind setter. Also, with a Terra type being like Dragon, you can make this into an incredible defensive monster, now being able to check all the Ogerpon forms, making the Suicune into a really good option for a lot more of the bulkier playstyles that could use Tailwind but don't necessarily rely on it. Speaking of Tailwind, we do have 2 really good damage breakers that I think could maybe have a place on Tailwind, but I don't exactly expect to pick up a ton, being Terrakion and Entei. Now, Terrakion is an incredible dual stab of fighting in rock that will see some play, I'm sure, but I don't really expect it to see much results, and frankly, I think the best we'll see from it, similar to Comfey, will be on the ladder, where we'll probably see it partnered with a beat up Whimsicott in order to try and get past newer players. This strategy definitely will pick off some people, but anyone who's familiar with it in Generation 8 probably will no longer be caught off guard by it, in my opinion. Meanwhile, just like with Terrakion being more in line with how I viewed Comfey, I think Entei is actually going to be the opposite, and it's going to fall in line with how I viewed Suicune, having a lot more success in tournament. Being faster than Hisuian Arcanine, this can fire off some really strong Sacred Fires, and then it also has the same ability that Dragonite has to get completely past Intimidate thanks to its ability Inner Focus. This will definitely see some strong play in my opinion, falling a lot more in line with the Terra Fairy or Terra Normal Banded Hisuian Arcanine sets, though I think Hisuian Arcanine could still see some success due to the fact that it does still have a Stab Rock Slide, which is something that frankly Entei could never actually keep up with damage-wise. On the end of moves like Flare Blitz, you could definitely get a much stronger Fire Stab out of Sacred Fire Entei, and Terra Blast will hit about as hard on both Pokemon, so I think it really just depends on the team that you're working with in order to find out which Pokemon you would need more. Now we have the big 3 of the VGC, which in my opinion, these 3 Pokemon will actually be by far the best, including anything newly created in this generation. Now this is one of 2 parts of the video where I'm going to go over the Pokemon based on their viability. And in this particular case, I'm going to go from worst to best for these 3 Pokemon specifically, starting off with Metagross, which gained a lot of really good buffs in this DLC. For one, we finally have a 100% accurate physical psychic move through the use of Psychic Fangs, which will be an incredible addition to Metagross as it allows you to break through screens, especially with Aurora Veil being on the rise due to low Ninetales usage, while also not having to miss Zen Headbutt. Also, Metagross gained Knockoff, which is a really good means of clearing through items, and it's an overall great support move for Metagross. I don't think Metagross will exactly be the most damning Pokemon in this format. but it's an incredible Flutter Mane check with access to priority Bullet Punch, forcing Flutter Mane to potentially have to even consider more defensive Terras in order to survive the hit. Metagross will probably end up seeing success as a really good Assault Vest Pokemon that'll have a lot of good moves like Knock Off, Psychic Fangs, Earthquake, High Horsepower, Meteor Mash, Bullet Punch, and many others in its arsenal. And with Clear Body especially, this will turn into a really damning physical threat that doesn't have to worry about the likes of Incineroar and Landorus in the format. Speaking of Incineroar, I think Incineroar actually is the second best Pokemon returning in this DLC. And I think it's more due to the format itself than a Pokemon conceptually speaking. If I had to talk about a Pokemon fundamentally, I don't think that VGC has a better Pokemon than Incineroar in the history of its lifespan. But currently, I don't think that's the case. Incineroar is still incredible, and it didn't get nerfed by any means. It still has options like Knock Off, Will-O-Wisp, Parting Shot, etc. Now I expect Incineroar to still be used more than any returning Pokemon, and it might even still keep the #1 usage in the general format due to its insane splashability on any type of archetype. But I think the actual best Pokemon coming back is going to be none other than Whimsicott. Now Whimsicott offers a few things that no other Pokemon currently does. For one, it is the fastest Pokemon to set Tailwind that specifically has the ability Prankster, while still keeping a viable role in the format. This basically just means it outpaces Tornadus, which is still a pretty big benchmark to hit, especially considering that Tornadus is now significantly more susceptible to taunt. Not only this, but Whimsicott has plenty of ways to actually boost its partner spot for damage. With options like Fake Tears to boost the damage your special attackers will do by dropping your opponent's special defense by 2 stages, or Charm, which can drop your opponent's physical attack, you have really good support moves from Whimsicott, and this doesn't even get into the more disruptive utility like options such as Encore and Sunspore might provide. Not only this, but you still get Taunt and Tailwind, which are both incredible moves, and frankly I think Whimsicott's biggest failure in this format will be the fact that it can only run 4 of these. Now I think Whimsicott can frankly tailor to any sort of hyper offensive team that you want, and it will find a lot of success, especially considering it can outpace Tornadus, and it will always get the taunt off if you invest for it. And I think this is where, compared to a Pokemon like Incineroar, that Whimsicott really shines, because Incineroar has a lot of new things in this format that just generally keep it out of place as the #1 pick. This would be things such as Terra Fire ignoring its Will-O-Wisp burns, Clear Amulet ignoring Parting Shot and Intimidate, Covert Cloak and Terra Ghost being great ways around Fake Out, and many other things that just currently don't really favor it in the format. Though both of these Pokemon will still honestly be in the top 10 usage definitively, both in tournament level play and in ladder play in my opinion, as they're both incredible, very essential Pokemon to the format. Now I do want to end this video briefly talking about some of the new Pokemon. No, not you Peacherun, get out of this video, you're super unviable. Aww. Now for the actually good Pokemon, we do have 6 new ones that I think will all actually hold some sort of niche in the format. Starting off with the new DLC Dragons, Archaludon and Hydrapple. I think both of these could at least perform a very specific set of benefits to certain teams. Starting with Archaludon, its a move Electro Shot benefits a lot from Rain, functioning as a 130 base power electric move that has no charge thanks to the Rain, and boosts Archaludon's special attack by 1 stage. With your incredibly well-rounded coverage, as well as access to stamina plus body press, I think this could actually hold a decent spot in the format, especially as a really good defensive Dragon Steel type, though it's going to pretty much require an Assault Vest, which Rain teams already have a better Assault Vest Pokemon anyway right now, being Iron Hands. So it will have some competition, but I think it might find a place on someone's team this regulation. Meanwhile, Hydrapple has 2 things going for it. The first being it finally has a really viable ability for a defensive grass, being Regenerator, which we've already seen be very successful in the likes of Amoonguss. Though I think also the fact that we now have actual coverage on Hydrapple and a speed tier of 44 means this might actually be a really good chicken breaker. Hydrapple having a 120 special attack and options like Hydro Pump and Earth Power in its arsenal, or even Nasty Plot to boost its special attack, I think it might, genuinely speaking, be a really good Pokemon in this format. Now, I think these will definitely both be fairly niche options, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't expect, at least during a single tournament in this format, for them to at least make day 2. Now up next, we have 2 Pokemon that I expect to probably make a top 8 at some point, but not be consistent options, being Iron Boulder and Gouging Fire. Starting with Iron Boulder, it has a really incredible offensive stat spread with 120 attack and 124 speed, making it a really good candidate for booster energy. With Psychic and Rock as a typing though, this isn't really great defensively, and it's going to be pretty heavily Force of Terra. Though having a 100% accurate Rock type move will be incredible for it, as this is a strong Rock type option that's never going to miss. But I don't really think that Iron Boulder is going to be a metagame presence, purely due to the fact that its typing kinda sucks. Gouging Fire, meanwhile, does have a few things going for it, such as the Fire Stab for photosynthesis, which can take advantage of your sun without even needing to Terra, making this an incredible wall breaker for teams. With a really high physical defense too, I think defensive Terra options like Terra Dragon, Terra Grass, and Terra Water all will be very much appreciated here. The only downside that I think this Pokemon has, despite an incredible offensive move pool with options like Raging Fury, Breaking Swipe, and Stopping Tantrum, as well as the signature version of Protect that's essentially just a burn version of Baneful Bunker, I think really the biggest thing that's going to hold Gouging Fire back is going to be its speed. At 91 base speed, while in Tailwind this does mean you'll just barely outpace Iron Bundle, it's still kind of slow for a physical fire type, and I think I'd rather just run something like Hisuian Arcanine, which at least has good priority in its move pool, or even something like an Entei, which can not only outpace it, but would viably have coverage to actually break this Pokemon. Finally though, we do have two more Paradox Pokemon that I think will actually be strong mainstays in this format, being Iron Crown and Raging Bolt. Originally, I wasn't actually even going to rank Iron Crown in this portion of the video, but when I realized this thing just barely outpaces Urshifu, has access to Expanding Force, could be a decent booster speed candidate on Psy Spam, and it has a really good way to break through Sash, Chien-Pao, and Flutter Mane, this Pokemon might actually be kind of cool as a really good niche option in BGC, and I expect someone to maybe even win a regional with it. The Steel Psychic typing is nothing to scoff at, and it's going to be a great candidate for options like defensive Terra Grass and Terra Fire. Meanwhile, Raging Bolt I think will actually be the one that I'm expecting the best results from, with Electric and Dragon being an amazing check to Tauren Shifu, which has been one of the most problematic cores of the current Regulation E. With a priority Sucker Punch that's just special and electric typing, this will be a very terrifying Pokemon, and with options like Terra Fire to resist Flutter Mane and Shiyu, especially the Flutter Mane aspect of that core, I'm fully expecting Raging Bolt to win one, if not multiple regionals, as a phenomenal option, especially on Tornadus or Shifu teams. I don't think any of these Pokemon will outclass the big three, but I think that at the very bare minimum, Raging Bolt and Iron Crown will be the two that come the closest to competing with these. So these are the Pokemon that I think are going to be the best going into the Indigo Disk DLC. If you guys learned something new, make sure to let me know down below and leave a like and subscribe while you're on your way down there. As a reminder, if we get 40 likes on this video, we're going to be doing a Pokemon that got the best buffs in the Indigo Disk DLC video soon, so make sure you guys leave a like, especially if you are looking forward to that. Comment down below what Pokemon you guys are looking forward to using the most come Regulation F, as I'd love to see what you guys think will be the good Pokemon to use, or even just ones that you want to try out yourself. Also, if you enjoy this type of content as always, make sure to check out Kurt, whose channel is going to be linked in the card. I think it's right here is where the cards go. It's one of these two. Just look for the card. Kurt will be there. Kurt makes phenomenal content, and soon we'll be uploading some amazing VGC content on his channel. So make sure you guys check out Kurt. Peace out, guys.